Yo, what's good guys? Welcome back to another video. With fitness, I know we commonly associate fitness with aesthetics, but what really is aesthetic? What is the difference between aesthetic and just pure mass? Just based off of other people's opinions to formulate my own. Aesthetic is interest in something's looks, appreciation of an image in the art. Really, when you process that and take a step back and try to think and formulate what that really means in terms relative to fitness, there's a lot of elements that take part in an individual's aesthetic. And a lot of that with social media has to do with angles and lighting. Yes, it's deceptive in a sense to where like a lot of the time some people don't necessarily look the way they do in person as opposed to social media, and that's all right. But outside of angles and pure lighting, if we're just looking at an individual's, stature and appearance, we can think leanness, striation, vascularity, and overall their proportion size in looking at somebody's waist to like shoulder ratios, their X-body frame, certain elements like that make these almost godlike proportion sizes to where a person appears more aesthetic. When we're thinking in terms of like overall balance of a physique, you don't want necessarily a massive waist in relation to your shoulders. That's a balance. The same thing with, as opposed, let's say my forearms to my arm ratio. Obviously, if I have smaller forearms, my arms are gonna look more massive and vice versa. Or even like on my side, I got some massive ass calves, right? But they're unproportional to my leg, my like quads and everything. I don't have small legs. I still train leg. Like I do men's physique, but I still hit the fucking leg day, bro. But my calves are unproportionately large in comparison to my quads. Don't get me wrong, blessing, but fucking it's a good problem to have. But yeah, when we think about this X physique, like think about society's norms of what is ideally aesthetic. We think of like toys, like kids action figures, looking the epitome of what a male physique should look like, what a male athlete should look like, or like statues. If we want to think about Greek mythology or anything like that, we think of these statues of like these perfectly sculpted humans and individuals and physiques, and that really like ultimately plays a part into aesthetic. But there's a difference between aesthetic and actual mass. You can have mass and more muscle but not necessarily be aesthetic, and vice versa with that. You can also be necessarily tiny. If we're talking terms of social media, a lot of the time these skinnier people or smaller, slimmer like physiques don't necessarily have as much muscle in terms of size as these larger guys and being able to push as much weight. But if you have abs, think about it. If you see somebody with abs, you're already like, oh, that guy's fucking aesthetic. That guy might not even work out. Guy just might be genetically blessed and just like stay lean year round, but he's a naturally aesthetic because his proportions, because he has abs, and naturally his waist might be tinier, which is also gonna like show his fucking shoulders. He might be lean enough to where it shows striations, low enough body fat to where it has more vascularity. And in terms of vascularity, you can look at me in the off season. I still hold vascularity within my arms, look more so aesthetic when I'm in the off season, when I am putting on size, when I am bulking. But it's all like, in a sense, an illusion. That's what we find aesthetically pleasing. And if you're new here or don't really keep up with my content, just for reference, I'm 6'5", currently 240, nationally qualified in NPC men's physique division with a stage weight around 220. Now, if we want to compare physiques based off of what we came up with, what is necessarily aesthetic, let's start with the epitome of just male fucking alpha, fucking C-bum, fucking daddy Chris Bumstead, right? This man is undisputably, if not one of the most aesthetic men on this earth currently, standing at 6'1" and filled out, right? But that's all based off of proportions and also symmetry. Think about muscle imbalances. Muscle balances also play into a role. This man's abs, look at his muscle insertions as far as his abs and how tiny his waist ratio is to his shoulders. C-Bum's arms are not small, but where his weak points are is his bicep peep in correlation to his shoulder. But if we look at his physique, especially as a classic competitor where you're also being looked at you are being judged based off of this X frame. You want a smaller waist and you want these larger legs to where your body that builds this frame, builds this illusion that overall builds the fucking aesthetic. And the thing that makes C-Bum so aesthetic, again, to repeat and drill, is his height. his height, being able to fill out in that aspect, C-Bum is the perfect example of aesthetic meeting mass altogether. Except you don't necessarily have to have that mass. If we want to look at other people in regards of similar height, but not necessarily having that mass, let's look at, in terms of social media, one of the most aesthetic physiques, David Lade, at same height, 6'1", 6'2", but David Lade doesn't necessarily have all that size, but he's proportioned and has at least the illusion through social media that he stays this lean year round through all of his pictures, everything posted. If you just stumble across David, you cannot look at David Lade and say this man is not aesthetic. However, he doesn't have the size that someone like a competitor, like an actual bodybuilding competitor has. He does not have that mass to necessarily step on, especially a classic stage, let alone a competitive men's physique competition. However, height doesn't always necessarily correlate with aesthetic. You can also be a shorter frame. If we're talking about even somebody in the limelight such as Alex Eubanks for say. Alex Eubanks, undebatably one of the more impressive physiques, but again, going back to how we defined aesthetic, we have to look at his proportions. Alex, I know there's like questions of his natty status. I don't personally know Alex Eubanks like that, but I did see him at Summer Shredding down here in Houston this past June. Not necessarily the most tall person. Let's look up his height actually. So Alex Eubanks is 5'9", and Google says 176, my bad. Not necessarily the most massive individual to where he is a competitor in anything in that regards. Not saying he can't work up to that aspect, but he is a smaller guy. But what plays in his advantage is his actual proportion size. The most common Alex Eubanks pose is him doing his vacuum. Naturally, you do a vacuum pose, your waist is gonna look smaller, especially when he goes up here and the side of his delts are popping out to where it's essentially creating this illusion, this aesthetic illusion, to where everything's up here and it's going into his waist, because when he sucks in and creates that vacuum, he's creating that taper. It's all about proportions. That's what aesthetic is. But again, we take somebody of his height next to a taller frame and it's the size, the mass isn't necessarily there. However, if we want to compare it to like a larger person that more so is just a mass monster, not necessarily the most aesthetic person, let's compare powerlifting Larry Wheels, for example. Larry Wheels, it's undeniable how impressive his physique is, but doesn't necessarily have the bodybuilding proportions to be necessarily aesthetic. Not saying Larry Wheels is not impressive, but I would make the debate that somebody like Alex Eubanks, even David Lade, people of those physiques are more aesthetic than somebody like Larry Wheels, except Larry Wheels has more mass on his frame and is obviously throwing all this fucking weight. Comes to different elements of what is aesthetic. It's not a single individual thing where like we can define it by a definition. It's overall looking at a physique, looking at the proportions of different muscle groups. It's the overall product, the overall balance that a person has in these muscle groups that create that illusion, that aesthetic, those golden ratios, that the epitome of this is what creates the overall illusion of this is art. That is what aesthetic is, bro. Overall balance. Again, you don't have to have all this mass to be aesthetic. You can have all this mass and not be aesthetic. Or you could just be fucking a genetic freak, a genetic blessing, somebody like C-Bum, and have the best of both worlds. Be fucking massive and aesthetic at the same time. Dude, do what you want, bruh, at your own discretion advised. Bro, you don't need all this mass at the end of the day. You can stay natural and be more aesthetic than somebody on gear. At the end of the day, it's all dependent on you, your genetic limits, also how hard you push yourself. In my belief, I know some people are gonna disagree with me, but I believe hard work is always gonna beat talent at the end of the day. You can have as much talent, and from the jump, talent's gonna win, but if you're fucking out working, out fucking grinding other people, hard work's gonna beat talent at the end of the day. Same shit with aesthetics, bro. But again, that's just my opinion. Who knows? I'm only 6'5", 240, bro. My opinion's irrelevant at the end of the day, bro. Who the fuck am I, right? I'm just a fucking just a jacked leprechaun, bro. Again, that's just my thoughts. Let me know, like, necessarily if you agree, or what is aesthetic to you? Who's the most aesthetic motherfucker in the industry, in your opinion, bro? Because at the end of the day, that's what aesthetic is. Aesthetic is a subjective matter. whatever. Same thing with bodybuilding, same thing with competing. All these judges, it's subjective as hell. They look at somebody and it's all individualized on the person who is looking at them. And that is what is aesthetic. I fucking love y'all, and I'll catch y'all in the next video. We run up Code Red, bro. Support your boy, support the channel. We fucking growing. We taking this shit over, bro. I fucking love y'all motherfuckers, yeah.